I still remember the day I first saw Chen Hao reading under the old mulberry tree by the village well. He was 12 then, his fingers tracing characters in the dirt while other boys his age were chasing chickens or helping their fathers in the fields. There was something different about him, the way his eyes lit up when he discovered a new character, the careful way he held the broken slate he'd found discarded by a traveling merchant. "What are you doing?" I asked him that afternoon, my water bucket forgotten at my feet. He looked up, startled. "Learning," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a farmer's son to be studying characters meant for nobles. "My father says learning is for rich people," I replied, but I couldn't hide my curiosity. Chen Hao's face darkened. "My father says the same thing. He beats me when he catches me like this." I sat down beside him anyway. "Then why do you keep doing it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I read, I can see beyond these fields. I can imagine a different life." That was the beginning of everything. Over the months that followed, Chen Hao began teaching me to read, tracing characters in the dirt beside me as we sat by the well. "If I'm going to escape this life," he said one afternoon, his finger guiding mine over the stroke for dream, "you should escape with me." Over the years, I watched Chen Hao sneak into the village school meant for merchants' children, hiding behind walls and listening through windows. The schoolmaster would chase him away with a stick, but he always came back. His hunger for knowledge was unlike anything I'd ever seen, and I shared it now, practicing characters on scraps of paper he smuggled to me, reading the worn texts he managed to borrow or find. When we turned 16, my feelings for him had grown beyond childhood friendship. But Chen Hao's father had other plans. "You're to marry the blacksmith's daughter next spring," his father announced one evening, loud enough for half the village to hear. "She comes with a dowry and strong hips for bearing sons." I felt something crack inside my chest that night. Chen Hao found me by the river, tears streaming down my face. "I won't do it," he whispered, taking my hands in his. "I don't care what he says. I'd choose you, Yan Ling." "But your father," I started. "We'll have to accept it," he said firmly. "You're the only one who understands me. You're the only one who believes in my dreams." We began meeting in secret after that. When I had saved enough copper coins from selling vegetables at the market, I would buy him books, worn copies that traveling merchants were willing to part with cheaply. The joy on his face when I handed him a new text made every extra hour of work worth it. Someday, he would tell me as we sat together reading by candlelight in the old storage shed, "I'll be somebody important. Someone who matters. And I'll give you everything you deserve." I believed him. I believed in him with every fiber of my being. We married in the spring when I turned 19, though not in the way we had planned. I was already carrying his child by then, our secret meetings having led to more than stolen kisses. Chen Hao's father was furious, but the village elder convinced him that honor demanded the marriage proceed. "At least she's fertile," his father grumbled during the simple ceremony. "Maybe she'll give you sons to work the land." Our daughter, Xiao Mei, was born that autumn, a tiny, beautiful thing with Chen Hao's intelligent eyes and my stubborn chin. But from her first breath, she struggled. The village physician, old Master Lu, shook his head gravely. "Her lungs are weak," he explained, his weathered hands gentle as he examined our baby. "She'll need special herbs, careful tending." The medicines were expensive, more than we could afford on our small plot of land. I took work wherever I could find it, cleaning houses for the village merchants, helping with harvests, even scrubbing floors at the local inn. Chen Hao worked alongside me, but I could see the frustration growing in his eyes with each passing month. "This isn't the life I wanted for us," he confessed one night as we counted our meager coins, calculating whether we could afford Xiao Mei's next batch of medicine. "It's temporary," I assured him. "Things will get better." But they got worse. Chen Hao's father fell ill with a wasting disease, unable to work the fields. The burden of caring for two sick people and trying to keep our farm productive nearly broke us. I watched my husband grow thin and hollow-eyed, his beloved books gathering dust because he was too exhausted to read. When old Master Lu finally told us he could do no more for Xiao Mei, that we needed to take her to physicians in the capital, I felt our world crumble. We don't have the money for such a journey, Chen Hao said quietly. We barely have enough to feed ourselves. I held our sick daughter closer, her breathing shallow and labored. Then we'll find a way. We have to. But deep down, we both knew the truth. We were trapped by our circumstances, our dreams as fragile as morning frost. Everything changed the day the messenger arrived in our village. He was a royal courier, his blue robes marking him as someone from the capital. The entire village gathered to hear his proclamation. By decree of His Majesty, King Wei Jun, the messenger announced, his voice carrying across the square, the royal examinations shall henceforth be open to all free subjects of the realm, without regard to birth or station. The examination fee has been abolished. The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs. For generations, the royal exams had been the exclusive domain of nobles and wealthy merchants who could afford the crushing fees and years of private tutoring. I grabbed Chen Hao's arm, my heart racing. Did you hear that? I whispered urgently. This is your chance. He stared at the messenger, his face pale. Yan Ling, I haven't studied properly in years. I'm a farmer now, not a scholar. You're still the smartest person I know, I insisted. Remember how you could read at 6 years old while other children couldn't manage it at 15? Remember how you used to memorize entire passages after hearing them just once? That evening, after we had put Xiao Mei to bed, I spread Chen Hao's old books on our rough wooden table. They were water-stained and worn, but the knowledge within them was still precious. The exam is in 6 months, I said, lighting our only oil lamp. That's enough time if you focus. Chen Hao picked up one of the books, running his fingers over the familiar pages. What about the farm? What about helping with Xiao Mei? I'll handle all of that, I replied firmly. You just study. This is our way out, Chen Hao. If you pass the examination and become a royal official, we'll have the money to save our daughter and secure our future. He looked at me with such gratitude and love that my heart ached. You would do that for me? I would do anything for our family, I answered honestly. And so began the most difficult 6 months of our lives. While Chen Hao buried himself in books, studying by lamplight until his eyes burned, I took on every job I could find. I worked in the fields during the day, cleaned houses in the evening, and cared for Xiao Mei through the night. There were times when I was so exhausted I could barely stand, when my hands were raw from scrubbing and my back ached from bending over crops. But every time I saw Chen Hao's determined face bent over his texts, every time I imagined the life we could have if he succeeded, I found the strength to continue. The day Chen Hao left for the capital to take the examination, I pressed my last few coins into his hand for the journey. I'm scared, he confessed as we stood by the village gate. What if I fail? What if all your sacrifice has been for nothing? I cupped his face in my work-roughened hands. You won't fail. You're brilliant, Chen Hao. You just need to believe in yourself the way I believe in you. The weeks that followed were agonizing. Xiao Mei's condition worsened, and I spent most of my remaining money on medicines that seemed to do little good. I worked even harder, taking jobs that paid in rice or vegetables when cash wasn't available. Then came the day when another royal messenger arrived in our village. This time, he carried a list of examination results. My hands trembled as he read the names of those who had passed. From this village, the messenger announced, Chen Hao, son of Chen Wei, has achieved the highest score in the entire kingdom. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in amazed chatter. A commoner, a farmer, had not only passed the royal examination, but had scored higher than all the noble candidates who had been studying their entire lives. I felt tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. We had done it. Against all odds, we had changed our fate. Chen Hao returned home 3 days later, but he was different somehow. He wore new robes, simple but well-made, and carried himself with a new confidence. When he told me about his appointment to a position in the Royal Justice Department, reporting directly to the capital, I threw my arms around him. We did it, I sobbed against his chest. We actually did it. But even as I held him, I noticed how his embrace felt slightly distant, how his eyes seemed to look past our little village toward some horizon I couldn't see. "I'll need to travel to the capital within the week," he explained. "The position requires my immediate attention. But don't worry, once I'm established, I'll send for you and Xiao Mei. We'll have enough money to get her the best medical care available." I nodded eagerly. "How long do you think it will take?" "A few months at most," he assured me. "I need to prove myself first, find suitable housing for our family. Then we'll be together again, and everything will be different." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my child, the man I had sacrificed everything to help succeed. The first month after Chen Hao left, his letters arrived regularly. He wrote about his new position, the overwhelming nature of the capital, the fine house where he was boarding. He sent money, more than I had ever seen at one time, with instructions to use it for Xiao Mei's care and to prepare for our eventual move. "My superiors are impressed with my work," he wrote in one letter. "The Minister of Justice himself has taken notice of me. I believe my future here is very bright indeed." I was proud of him, but also lonely. Xiao Mei was growing weaker despite the expensive medicines I could now afford, and the village felt different somehow, smaller and duller, now that I knew there was a bigger world beyond it. The second month brought fewer letters, and they were shorter, more formal. Chen Hao wrote about his duties, but said little about missing us or when he might send for us. The money still came, but it felt somehow cold, like an obligation rather than a gift of love. By the third month, the letters stopped entirely. I told myself he was simply too busy, that his new responsibilities were overwhelming. I wrote to him regularly, describing Xiao Mei's condition, the village news, how much I missed him. I received no replies. It was during this time that Xiao Mei took a turn for the worse. Despite all the money Chen Hao had sent, despite the constant care I provided, our daughter slipped away on a cold autumn morning, her tiny hand clutched in mine. I wrote to Chen Hao immediately, my letter stained with tears. I told him that our daughter had gone to join the ancestors and begged him to come home, telling him I needed him now more than ever. I waited for a response, for some acknowledgement of our shared grief. None came. After a year of silence, I could bear it no longer. Using the last of the money Chen Hao had sent, I hired a cart to take me to the capital. Whatever was keeping my husband from writing, from returning, I would discover for myself. The capital was overwhelming, larger, and more magnificent than anything I had imagined. The streets teemed with people dressed in fine silks, and the buildings stretched toward the sky like mountains made of stone and timber. Finding Chen Hao proved easier than I had expected. His success had made him something of a celebrity, and several people directed me toward the residential district where court officials lived. The house was beautiful, 2 stories with a red-tiled roof and a garden that spoke of wealth and status. I smoothed my simple robes and knocked on the carved wooden door. A servant answered, looking me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "What do you want?" she asked curtly. "I'm here to see Chen Hao," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm his wife." The servant's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with something like malicious glee. "Wait here," she commanded, shutting the door in my face. Minutes passed before the door opened again. This time, Chen Hao himself stood in the doorway. He looked prosperous and healthy, his robes expensive, his hair arranged in the style of court officials. But when he saw me, his face went pale. "Yan Ling," he said quietly. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, unbelievable. "I'm your wife, Chen Hao. You stopped writing. You never came home, even when..." My voice broke. "Even when our daughter died." Something flickered across his face, guilt, perhaps, or pain. But it was quickly replaced by a cold hardness I had never seen in him before. "You shouldn't have come," he said, glancing nervously behind him. "This isn't a good time." Before I could respond, a sweet voice called from within the house. "Chen Hao, who is at the door?" A young woman appeared beside him, beautiful, dressed in silk robes that cost more than I had ever seen. Her hair was adorned with jade ornaments, and her skin was pale and soft, unmarked by years of labor. "This is Lady Xuan," Chen Hao said stiffly. My betrothed." The words struck me with unbearable shock. I staggered backward, my mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Lady Xuan looked me over with cool assessment. "And who is this person?" she asked, her tone making it clear that person was a generous description. "We need to talk," I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Alone." Chen Hao hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. We walked to a small courtyard where a fountain bubbled peacefully, its tranquil sound mocking the chaos in my heart. "How could you?" I asked, the words torn from somewhere deep inside me. "How could you do this to us? To our marriage?" Chen Hao wouldn't meet my eyes. "Yan Ling, you don't understand how things work here. I needed to establish myself, to make connections. Lady Xuan is the daughter of the Minister of Works. Marrying her will secure my position, my future." "Your future?" I stared at him in disbelief. "What about my future? What about the promises we made to each other?" "Those promises were made by different people," he replied, his voice growing harder. "I was a farmer then, trapped by circumstances. Now I'm a royal court official with prospects. I can't be held back by the past. I am not the past," I shouted, not caring who might hear. "I am your wife. I am the woman who worked herself to the bone so you could study, who sacrificed everything so you could have this chance. And I'm grateful for that," Chen Hao said, but his tone was patronizing now. "But you need to understand, I can't jeopardize everything I've worked for. Lady Xuan's father has influence. Her family has connections. They can help me rise even higher in the royal court." "And what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What about our daughter who died while you were here playing at being single?" For a moment, pain flashed across his features. I heard about Xiao Mei. I'm sorry, but she was sickly from birth. It was probably for the best." I slapped him then, my hand connecting with his cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the courtyard. He stepped back, his hand rising to his face in shock. "Don't you dare," I hissed. "Don't you dare say that about our child." Chen Hao's expression turned cold again. "I was planning to return to the village next month anyway," he said icily, "to deliver a formal dismissal letter. You being here simply saves me the journey." "Dismissal letter?" I repeated, not understanding. "A divorce decree," he clarified. "Under the law, a man may divorce his wife for failing to produce sons. You gave me only one child in 5 years of marriage, and she was sickly besides. The grounds are perfectly legal." I felt the world tilt around me. "You're divorcing me? After everything we've been through together?" "I'm setting us both free," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can find someone more suitable, a farmer or craftsman who doesn't have ambitions beyond the village. And I can make the marriage my position requires." "I don't want to be free," I whispered. "I want my husband back." But even as I said it, I realized that the man standing before me was not the Chen Hao I had married. That gentle, dreaming boy who had traced characters in the dirt was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The dismissal was mercifully brief. Chen Hao had already prepared everything. It was witnessed by 2 clerks of the magistrate, who treated the affair as routine. Within an hour, our 5-year marriage ended with a simple letter of dismissal. As we left the magistrate's office, Lady Xuan waited in a sedan chair, her servants standing at attention. She looked me over with the same cool assessment as before. "So you're the village pumpkin he was married to," she said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty that only comes from those born to privilege. "How rustic." "Xuan," Chen Hao said uncomfortably. "What?" she asked with false innocence. "I'm simply making conversation. After all, she's part of your past now, isn't she?" She turned back to me with a thin smile. "You know, if you find yourself with nowhere to go, we might have a position available in our household." We're always in need of kitchen maids. The offer was designed to humiliate, to make clear just how far I had fallen in the world's estimation. But there was also something else in her eyes, a satisfaction that suggested she had orchestrated this entire encounter. That's very generous, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, but I'll find my own way. Suit yourself, Lady Shuin said with a shrug. Though I should warn you, life in the capital can be quite harsh for women without protection or means. You might find our kitchen more comfortable than the alternatives. With that, she signaled her bearers and was carried away, leaving Chen Hao and me standing awkwardly in the street. Yan Ling, he began, but I cut him off. Don't, I said firmly. Just don't. You've made your choice clear. I turned and walked away before he could say anything else. I had no idea where I was going or what I would do, but I knew I couldn't bear to listen to any more of his justifications. The truth was, I was terrified. I was alone in the great capital with no money, no connections, and no skills beyond farming and hard labor. I had spent my last coins coming here and sold our farm to pay for Xiao Mei's medicines. I had nothing, but at least now I knew the truth. And perhaps, somehow, I could earn enough to return to my village and start over, away from this cruel city and the man who had destroyed my faith in love. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Finding work in the capital proved even more difficult than I had expected. My country clothes and rough hands marked me as a peasant, and most households wanted nothing to do with someone without references or connections. After 3 days of searching, sleeping in alleys and eating scraps, I was desperate enough to consider swallowing my pride and returning to Chen Hao's house to accept Lady Shuin's cruel offer. That's when I heard about General Zhao Ming. He's young for such a high position, explained the elderly woman who ran the employment house where I had been seeking work. Lost his father in the border wars and inherited the title. They say he's honorable but demanding, goes through servants quickly because he expects them to work as hard as he does. I'm not afraid of hard work, I assured her. She mused, looking me over critically. You're presentable enough, and you certainly look like you know what labor means. But he specifically requested someone who can read and write. Most of his correspondence is sensitive military matters. My heart leaped. I can read and write, I said eagerly. My former husband taught me when we were young. An hour later, I found myself standing before the gates of General Zhao Ming's residence. It was impressive but not flashy. It looked like the home of someone who valued function over display. The guards who admitted me were professional and courteous rather than dismissive. The general himself was younger than I had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with intelligent eyes and a bearing that spoke of both authority and integrity. He interviewed me personally rather than leaving the task to a servant. You've recently arrived from the countryside, he asked, glancing at the notes his steward had taken as I explained my background. Yes, General, I replied. My village is 2 days' journey south of the capital. And your husband? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. We are divorced, General. He took a position in royal court service and chose to marry into a more advantageous family. General Zhao Ming's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been understanding. I see. And you came to the capital alone to seek employment. I came to find my husband, I admitted. But yes, now I'm seeking employment. I plan to save enough money to return to my village and start over there. He was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that was evaluating rather than inappropriate. The position involves managing household accounts, correspondence, and coordinating with various merchants and officials. The work can be irregular, sometimes very demanding, sometimes routine. Can you handle that? Yes, General, I replied with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Good. You'll have a small room in the servants' quarters, regular meals, and wages paid monthly. Is that acceptable? It was more than acceptable, it was salvation. Hiding my relief, I simply said, Very acceptable, General. Thank you. As he showed me to my quarters, I caught him watching me with curious eyes. But unlike the calculating looks I had received from other potential employers, his gaze seemed respectful, even kind. Perhaps, I thought as I unpacked my few possessions in the small but clean room, this was where I could finally earn enough to return home and forget about the capital and its cruelties. Working for General Zhao Ming proved to be unlike anything I had experienced. He was demanding but fair, expecting excellence while providing the resources and respect necessary to achieve it. More importantly, he treated his servants as people rather than possessions. "Your handwriting is quite good," he commented one morning after reviewing some correspondence I had copied. "Where did you learn to write with such precision?" "My former husband taught me," I replied. He was very dedicated to learning. "He taught me when we were young, before life became complicated." "And he taught you well," the general said, then paused. "May I ask what happened to your marriage?" "You don't need to answer if it's too personal." I set down my brush carefully. He passed the civil service examination and received a royal court position. Once he was established in the capital, he decided that a farm wife was unsuitable for his new status. General Zhao Ming's jaw tightened. "He divorced you to marry someone more politically advantageous?" "The Minister of Work's daughter," I confirmed. "Ah," he said, his tone carrying disgust. "I know of that marriage. It was quite the talk of the royal court circles, the brilliant commoner who scored highest on the exams marrying into the inner circle so quickly." "You know my former husband?" I asked, surprised. "Of him," the general clarified. "Chen Hao has made quite an impression in his short time here. Ambitious, intelligent, but—" He hesitated. "But what, General?" "But perhaps too eager to shed his origins. There's something unsettling about a man who so completely abandons his past." Over the following months, I threw myself into my work with a determination that surprised even me. I managed the general's household accounts with meticulous care, handled his correspondence with growing skill, and gradually took on more responsibilities as he recognized my capabilities. Every copper coin I earned went into a small box I kept hidden in my room, my passage back to the village, to a simpler life. "You're wasted as a household servant," General Zhao Ming told me one evening as we reviewed supply requests for his troops. "You have the mind of an administrator." "Thank you," I replied, though I wasn't sure how to respond to such praise. "I'm serious," he continued. "Have you ever considered that there might be opportunities for you beyond domestic service?" I looked up from the ledger I was updating. "What do you mean?" "The military administration always needs skilled clerks and coordinators. People who can read, write, calculate, and organize. People who understand the value of honest work." The suggestion was so unexpected that I could only stare at him. "But I'm a woman. And a divorced peasant besides. My plan is to return to my village once I've saved enough." "Return to your village?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "I didn't realize you intended to leave." "There's nothing for me here in the capital. We sold our farm when times were hard. When I save enough money to buy a new one, I'll go home and start over." Something passed across his face, disappointment, perhaps, but he simply nodded. "I see. Well, that's certainly your choice to make." But as the weeks passed, I noticed subtle changes in how he treated me. He would find excuses to work alongside me rather than leaving me to complete tasks independently. When our hands accidentally brushed as we both reached for the same official record one evening, I felt a spark of something that made my breath catch, and I saw him quickly pull back, his expression carefully neutral. I scolded myself for even noticing. He was a general, a man of high status and noble birth. I was his divorced peasant servant, planning to return to obscurity as soon as possible. The very idea that there could be anything between us was absurd. And after Chen Hao's betrayal, how could I even think of trusting my heart to another man, especially one so far above my station? Yet I couldn't help noticing how his gaze would sometimes linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking, only to snap away when I glanced up. How he would grow unusually formal and brusque in his manner after our interactions became too comfortable. How he seemed to catch himself making small protective gestures, steadying my arm when I stumbled, moving instinctively between me and a group of rowdy soldiers who had come to the house one day, and then stepping back as if he had overstepped some invisible boundary. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was dangerous to even entertain such thoughts. But my treacherous heart wouldn't listen. In early summer, I accompanied the general to the command hall to deliver some sensitive correspondence. He preferred that I handle certain correspondence personally rather than trusting it to messengers, and I had grown accustomed to these occasional trips beyond the household. We were walking through one of the capital's market districts on our return when I saw her, a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with delicate features and bright, curious eyes. She was laughing as she chased a butterfly between the market stalls, her mother calling after her with fond exasperation. The resemblance hit me hard. That was exactly how Xiao Mei had looked in those brief moments when she felt well enough to play, before the illness consumed her entirely. The same tilt of the head, the same musical laugh, the same way of moving that was somehow both fragile and full of life. I stopped walking, my breath caught in my chest. The general continued a few steps before realizing I was no longer beside him. "Yan Ling?" he asked, turning back. Then his expression changed as he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the little girl, now safely gathered into her mother's arms, still giggling about the butterfly. My vision blurred with tears I couldn't stop. "Yan Ling," the general said more urgently, his hand touching my elbow. "Are you ill?" "I'm sorry, General," I managed to whisper. I need a moment." He guided me to a quieter side street, away from the crowds. I pressed my back against a wall, trying to regain my composure, but the tears kept coming. It had been over a year since Xiao Mei died, and I thought I had built walls strong enough to contain this grief. But seeing that child had torn them all down. "Talk to me," General Zhao Ming said gently. "What happened?" "That little girl," I said, my voice breaking. "She looked just like my daughter." His expression shifted to one of shocked understanding. "Your daughter?" The words poured out then, all the grief I had been carrying alone. "Her name was Xiao Mei. She was born with weak lungs, always struggling to breathe. My husband and we worked so hard to afford her medicines, to keep her alive. That's why I pushed him to take the examinations, why I sacrificed so much. I thought if he became a court official, we'd have enough money to save her." I wiped at my tears roughly, angry at myself for breaking down like this. "But she died while he was here in the capital, establishing himself. She died holding my hand, asking for her father, and he never even came home. He never even acknowledged her death in his letters. And then when I came here to find him, when I told him she was gone," he said. I choked on the words. "He said it was probably for the best." "Merciful heavens," General Zhao Ming breathed, his voice filled with quiet fury. "I held her as she took her last breath," I continued, unable to stop now that I had started. "I sang to her, told her everything would be all right, that her father would come home soon. But he never did. And now she's gone, and some days I forget for a moment that she ever existed, and then I remember, and it feels like losing her all over again." To my surprise, the general pulled a clean handkerchief from his robes and pressed it into my hands. Then, even more surprisingly, he rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm so deeply sorry for your loss, and for how you've had to bear it alone." I looked up at him through my tears and saw genuine compassion in his eyes, not pity, but something deeper. Understanding, perhaps. Shared grief. "Did you lose someone too?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was often at war, and she was all I had. I know what it is to lose someone precious and feel like the world should stop, but it just keeps moving forward as if nothing happened." We stood there in that quiet side street, two people who had learned that loss doesn't make you stronger, it just teaches you how to carry weight you never wanted. "Thank you," I said finally, dabbing at my eyes with his handkerchief. "For not telling me it gets easier, or that I should move on." Those are things people say when they don't know what grief feels like, he replied. The truth is, you learn to live with it. The weight doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger at carrying it. As we resumed our walk home, I found myself grateful not just for his kindness, but for his honesty. And I noticed that he stayed closer to my side than usual, as if his presence alone could somehow help shoulder the burden I carried. That evening, I found a small package outside my door. Inside was a delicate hair ornament made of jade, simple but beautiful. There was no note, but I knew who had left it. It was the kind of gift a man might give to honor a child's memory. I held it in my hands and wept again, but this time the tears felt different. Less lonely somehow. After that day in the market, something shifted between the general and me. He began seeking my opinion on matters beyond household management, asking for my thoughts on everything from troop logistics to diplomatic communications. But there was a new tension in our interactions, a heightened awareness that made the air feel charged whenever we worked together. You have excellent instincts, he told me one evening as we reviewed reports from the border garrisons. You see patterns that others miss. We were seated at his large work table, papers spread between us. As he reached across to show me a particular passage, his arm brushed against mine. The contact lasted only a second, but I felt it like lightning down my spine. He pulled back quickly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Thank you, General, I managed, trying to focus on the papers rather than the way my skin still tingled where he had touched me. I've had to learn to be observant, I continued, forcing my voice to remain steady. When you have little power, attention to detail becomes a matter of survival. And now that you have more power, he asked, his voice lower than usual. I looked up from the papers and found him watching me with an intensity that made my heart race. Do I have power? More than you realize, he said seriously, holding my gaze. You manage this household, and you have earned the respect of everyone you work with. That's a form of power. The moment stretched between us, neither of us moving. Then he seemed to catch himself and turned abruptly back to the reports. We should finish these before the hour grows too late, he said, his tone suddenly formal, almost cold. I felt the shift like a door closing and told myself it was for the best. What was I even thinking, reading meaning into such moments? He was being kind to a grieving employee, nothing more. And I was being foolish, letting myself feel things I had no right to feel. That night, lying in my room, I stared at the ceiling and forced myself to think practically. I had been working for the general for nearly 7 months now. My hidden box of savings was growing steadily. In a few more months, I would have enough to return to my village, buy a small piece of land, and start over. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. I couldn't afford to complicate it by developing feelings for a man who was completely beyond my reach. A man who, for all his kindness, would eventually marry someone of his own station. The thought made my chest ache in a way that felt dangerously familiar. No, I told myself firmly. Not again. Never again. But the next day, when the general's hand accidentally brushed mine as we both reached for the same accounting ledger, and I saw the way he looked at me before he jerked away and began shuffling papers with unnecessary intensity, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't the only one feeling this pull between us. And that made it so much worse. 2 weeks later, when General Zhao Ming needed to attend a military review at the palace grounds, he asked me to accompany him to manage certain administrative details and correspondence that might arise. Several officials will be present, he explained as we traveled in his carriage. If anyone requires written confirmation of supply agreements or troop deployments, I'd rather have you there to handle it accurately than trust it to scribes who might miss important details. I nodded, smoothing my plain but neat robes. They were better quality than what I had arrived in. The general had quietly arranged for appropriate clothing for any servants who might need to appear in official settings, but I was still obviously a servant beside the silk-clad nobles and officials. The review itself was impressive but dull, consisting mainly of formations and demonstrations while officials made notes and discussed logistics. I stood to the side with other scribes and assistants, ready to be called upon if needed. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Yan Ling. I turned to find Chen Hao approaching. He looked startled to see me there. Chen Hao, I acknowledged coolly, very aware of the other people around us. What are you doing here? He asked, his eyes taking in my servant's robes with poorly concealed confusion. I work for General Zhao Ming, I replied quietly. I'm here to assist with administrative matters. You're working for him? Chen Hao's face went through several expressions, surprise, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite read, and then a forced casualness. That's good. I'm glad you found suitable employment. Before I could respond, he moved closer, lowering his voice. I've been wanting to speak with you, actually. To explain things properly. Perhaps we could. Yan Ling. General Zhao Ming's voice cut through Chen Hao's words. The general had approached without me noticing, his expression neutral, but his eyes hard as they moved between us. General, I said quickly. This is Chen Hao. He is. I know who he is, the general interrupted, his tone colder than I had ever heard it. Official Chen Hao, I believe we've met at several court functions. General Zhao Ming, Chen Hao replied, straightening. Yes, of course. I was just greeting an old acquaintance. I see. The general's jaw was tight. Yan Ling, I need you to review the quartermaster's reports. They're in my tent. It was clearly a dismissal, and not a subtle one. I glanced at Chen Hao, then back at the general, confused by the sudden tension. Yes, General, I said quietly, and left them standing there. As I walked away, I couldn't help glancing back once. Chen Hao was speaking in low tones, gesturing, while the general stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his posture radiating displeasure. The rest of the day, General Zhao Ming was distant and formal, addressing me with clipped efficiency and avoiding any unnecessary interaction. When we returned home that evening, he dismissed me immediately, saying he had correspondence to handle alone. I retreated to my room, confused and hurt by his coldness. Had I done something wrong by speaking with Chen Hao? It wasn't as if I had sought him out. And why did the general care anyway? Unless... I pushed the thought away, but it kept returning as I lay awake that night. Could the general possibly be jealous? But that would mean he felt something for me, something beyond employer and employee. Something that would explain all those charged moments, the careful distance he maintained, the way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The possibility made my heart race with equal parts hope and terror. The next evening, General Zhao Ming summoned me to his study. I went with my heart pounding, uncertain what to expect after his cold behavior the previous day. He was standing by the window when I entered, his back to me, hands clasped behind him. You wanted to see me, General? I asked quietly. He turned, and the expression on his face stopped my breath. He looked troubled, conflicted, almost vulnerable. Sit down, please, he said, gesturing to a chair. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. I owe you an apology, he began, then seemed to struggle with his next words. My behavior yesterday was inappropriate. I had no right to be so cold to you simply because you were speaking with your former husband. I wasn't seeking him out, I said quickly. He approached me. I know. He ran a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically agitated gesture. That's not the point. The point is that He paused, then seemed to come to some decision. Yan Ling, I need to be honest with you about something. He moved to sit in the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. When I hired you, it was because I needed someone capable and trustworthy. But over these months, you've become much more than an employee. I held my breath, not daring to speak. You've become someone I rely on not just for household management, but for counsel, for companionship for. He paused, searching for the right words. For understanding, in a way I've never experienced before. And yesterday, when I saw you with Chen Hao, when I saw the way he was looking at you, speaking to you with such presumption. He shook his head. I realized I was jealous. Unreasonably, inappropriately jealous. General, I started, but he held up a hand. Please, let me finish. I know the impropriety of what I'm about to say. I know the difference in our stations, the complications it would create. But I also know that I've grown to care for you deeply, and I hope, that you might feel the same. The study fell silent except for the soft sound of wind through the plum blossoms outside. My throat felt tight, and I struggled to find words. I do feel the same, I whispered finally. But I'm terrified. Of what? Of being hurt again. Of trusting someone with my heart only to have them decide I'm not suitable for their ambitions. General Zhao Ming's expression grew fierce. I am not Chen Hao. I would never ask you to change who you are or abandon who you've become. If anything, I'm asking you to be more yourself, not less. But your position, your family, your future would all be enhanced by having someone of your intelligence and integrity beside me, he finished firmly. Yan Ling, you've shown me what real strength looks like. You've survived betrayal and rebuilt your life through sheer determination. You've earned respect through merit rather than birth. That's exactly the kind of partner I want. I stood up abruptly, moving to the window to look out at the garden. The plum blossoms were beautiful but fragile, and I couldn't help thinking of how easily beautiful things could be destroyed. What are you asking me? I said without turning around. I'm asking you to marry me, he replied simply. Not as a political alliance or a convenient arrangement, but as a true partnership between equals. I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten. You could have anyone. A nobleman's daughter, someone who could advance your career. I don't want anyone else, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. I want you, Yan Ling. Just you. When I turned back to face him, he was standing, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I know I'm asking you to risk your heart again, he continued. I know that the last time you trusted someone completely, he betrayed that trust in the cruelest possible way. I've been fighting these feelings for months, trying to maintain proper distance, trying to convince myself that it was impossible. But yesterday, seeing him with you, I realized I couldn't bear the thought of you with anyone else. And more than that, I couldn't bear continuing to hide what I feel. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. I've been fighting it too, I admitted, my voice shaking. Every time our hands touched, every time I caught you watching me, I told myself I was imagining things. That you were a general and I was just your servant. That after Chen Hao, I could never trust anyone again. That I should just save my money and return to my village where things were simple. And now, he asked quietly. Now I'm terrified, I said honestly. But I'm also. I struggled to find the words. I'm also tired of being afraid. Tired of letting what Chen Hao did control my future. And the truth is, I took a shaky breath. The truth is, I've fallen in love with you. I've tried not to, tried to keep my heart safe, but I didn't get to finish the sentence because he crossed the room in 3 quick strides and gathered me into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, questioning, and when I responded, my hands fisting in his robes, pulling him closer, it deepened with a passion that had been building between us for months. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Is that a yes? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I thought of Chen Hao, of the dreams we had shared and how they had turned to ash. I thought of the woman I had been then, naive, trusting, willing to sacrifice everything for someone else's ambition. Then I thought of who I was now, stronger, wiser, more complete in myself. And I thought of this man who had seen all of that and valued it. Yes, I whispered. It's a yes. The announcement of our engagement created quite a stir in both the royal court and social circles. A general marrying his former servant was unconventional enough, but the fact that I was a divorced peasant made it positively scandalous. Let them talk, General Zhao Ming said dismissively when his aide reported some of the more critical gossip. Their opinions changed nothing. But I knew the whispers affected his standing, and I told him so one evening as we planned our simple ceremony. We could wait, I suggested. Until the talk dies down, until your position is more secure. He took my hands in his expression serious. Yan Ling, if I've learned anything from watching other men in court, it's that there will always be something to wait for, some reason to delay doing what's right. I won't let other people's small-mindedness keep me from the woman I love. It was 3 days before our marriage ceremony that we received an unexpected visitor. Chen Hao arrived at the general's residence late in the evening, requesting a private audience with me. General Zhao Ming's expression darkened when his aide delivered the message. "You don't have to see him," he said immediately. "I know," I replied. "But perhaps I should. To at least know what he wants." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll be just outside if you need me." Chen Hao was shown into the small receiving room, and I entered to find him pacing nervously. He looked haggard, his fine robes unable to disguise the hollow look in his eyes, the way he seemed to have aged years in the months since I'd seen him. "Yan Ling," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Chen Hao?" I asked, remaining standing near the door. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded me painfully of the boy I had once known. "I came to apologize. To try to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted gently. "You made your choice. I've made mine. But you need to understand," he said desperately, moving toward me. "My marriage to Shuin is a disaster. She despises me, her father treats me like a useful tool, and I've discovered that advancement in court has more to do with palace intrigue than merit. Everything I thought I wanted has turned to ashes." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and realized I genuinely meant it. "But it changes nothing. It changes everything." His voice rose, then dropped to an anguished whisper. "I destroyed the best thing in my life for ambition that turned out to be worthless. I think about you every day, about Xiao Mei, about the life we could have had. I was wrong, Yan Ling. I was so terribly wrong." "Yes, you were," I agreed calmly. "But that doesn't mean we can go back." "Why not?" He moved closer, his desperation palpable. "We understood each other once. We shared dreams. We could have that again. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm begging you, don't marry the general. Come back to me. Let me make things right." I looked at him, this man who had once been my whole world, and felt only a distant sadness for what we had lost and what he had become. "Chen Hao," I said gently, "even if I were willing to forgive you, which I'm not sure I could, I'm no longer the woman you married. I don't need you to rescue me or provide for me. I've built a life for myself, and I've found someone who values me for who I am now, not who I used to be." "But we were good together once," he pleaded. "We were children then," I corrected. "We shared dreams that turned out to be naive fantasies. What I have with General Zhao Ming is based on who we are now, not who we used to be. It's built on respect and equality, not sacrifice and subservience." Chen Hao's face crumpled. "So that's it? You won't even consider it?" "I hope you find peace," I told him sincerely. "I hope you learn to be happy with the choices you've made, or find the courage to make different ones. But my future is no longer connected to yours." "You're making a mistake," he said, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "The general will tire of you eventually. You're still just a peasant, still unsuitable for someone of his station." "Perhaps," I replied calmly. "But that's my risk to take." Chen Hao stared at me for a long moment, then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "I truly have lost you, haven't I?" "You lost me the day you chose ambition over our love," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Chen Hao." He left without another word, and I stood there for a moment, processing the encounter. To my surprise, I felt no satisfaction in his obvious misery, but I also felt no regret about refusing him. General Zhao Ming entered as soon as Chen Hao departed, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. "Do you regret it?" he asked carefully. "Refusing him?" I considered the question seriously. "I regret what we lost, what could have been if he had made different choices. But refuse him? No. That woman who loved him unconditionally no longer exists. And the woman who loves me?" I turned to face him fully, taking in his strong features, his kind eyes, the way he looked at me as if I were precious beyond measure. She's stronger, wiser, and more sure of what she wants, I replied. And what she wants is a partnership built on respect and equality, not sacrifice and subservience. General Zhao Ming smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Then she shall have exactly that. Our marriage ceremony was held on a bright morning in late spring, with plum blossoms falling like snow around us as we performed the traditional rites. It was smaller than either of our first marriage ceremonies had been, just close friends, loyal servants, and a few progressive officials who supported General Zhao Ming despite the scandal. As we bowed to heaven and earth, then to our honored ancestors, I thought about how different this felt from my marriage to Chen Hao. That ceremony had been rushed, performed out of necessity rather than joy. This one was a celebration of choice, of two people who had found each other despite the obstacles in their path. When we drank from the shared cup of wine, General Zhao Ming, now my husband, whispered, to new beginnings and honest partnerships. To love that sees clearly and chooses anyway, I whispered back. The feast afterward was simple but joyful. General Zhao Ming had insisted that all the servants participate as guests rather than workers, and their genuine happiness for our union moved me more than the approval of nobles ever could have. As the evening wound down, my new husband and I stood together in the garden, watching the last guests depart. The plum trees rustled softly in the breeze, their blossoms creating a carpet of pale pink on the ground. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from a few days earlier. I leaned against his side, feeling his arm come around me protectively. "None at all." "Good," he murmured against my hair. "Because I have plans for us, Lady Yan Ling." The title still felt strange, but I was learning to embrace it along with all the other changes in my life. "What sort of plans?" I asked. "The king has been impressed with some of the administrative innovations you've suggested through me. He's considering creating a new department to improve the court's efficiency, and he's asked me to recommend someone to head it." I pulled back to look at him in surprise. "You're not suggesting." "Why not? You understand both the common people's needs and the workings of the court better than anyone else in the capital. You've proven yourself capable of managing complex duties and earning respect from people at every level." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. A peasant woman running a bureau of the court? The scandal would be enormous. "Let it be," General Zhao Ming said firmly. "Change always creates scandal among those who benefit from the old ways. But you've shown that merit should matter more than birth, that intelligence and integrity are more valuable than noble blood." I thought about it as we walked back toward the house, my husband's hand warm in mine. A year ago, I had been a desperate farm wife begging for scraps of attention from a husband who had already mentally abandoned me. Now I was being offered a chance to shape royal court policy, to make the kingdom more fair for people like the woman I used to be. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "That's all I ask," he replied, then smiled. "Well, that, and for you to be happy." As we entered our home together, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken. I had started this journey believing that love and sacrifice were enough to build a future. I had learned, painfully, that they weren't, that sometimes the people we love most can hurt us deepest, and that dreams built on someone else's ambition are as fragile as morning frost. But I had also learned that endings can become beginnings, that broken dreams can be rebuilt into something stronger. The woman who had worked herself to exhaustion pushing her husband higher in the world was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own worth, who had earned respect through her own efforts, who had found a love that valued her strength rather than demanding her submission. My husband squeezed my hand as we climbed the stairs, and I squeezed back, ready for whatever came next.